This video is brought to you by togetherbudget.com. An emergency fund is essentially a pool of money set aside for unexpected expenses, such as car repairs or medical bills.
That makes sense. I've always thought of it as a rainy day fund, but I never really knew what that meant in terms of actual dollars.
Exactly. And the idea is to have enough money set aside so you can cover 3 to 6 months of living expenses without going into debt or dipping into your investments.
So, how do I actually go about building an emergency fund? Is it just about setting aside X amount of money each month?
It's not quite that simple. You want to start by calculating your monthly essential expenses: rent/mortgage, utilities, groceries, transportation, etc.
Okay, I see what you mean. And then how do I actually set aside the money?
It's also important to consider the 50/30/20 rule. 50% of your income goes towards necessary expenses, 30% towards discretionary spending, and 20% towards saving and debt repayment.
That makes sense. But what if I'm not earning enough to save 20%?
Then you might need to adjust your budget or explore ways to increase your income, such as taking on a side hustle or asking for a raise at work. So, let's start with the basics. An emergency fund is essentially a cushion that absorbs financial shocks when they inevitably come your way.
I see what you mean. But why do I need one? Can't I just cut back on expenses or use my credit card in case of an emergency?
Cutting back on expenses can help, but it's not always feasible or sustainable. And using your credit card can lead to even more debt, which is often harder to pay off than you think.
I never thought about it that way. What are some common scenarios where an emergency fund would come in handy?
Well, let's consider the scenario where you lose your job. An emergency fund can cover essential expenses like rent/mortgage, utilities, and food while you're looking for a new job.
That makes sense. But how do I calculate how much I need in my emergency fund? Is it just based on my monthly expenses?
So, let's dive into the question of how much you should save in your emergency fund. The general rule of thumb is to have enough saved up to cover 3 to 6 months' worth of living expenses.
That sounds like a great starting point, but what if I'm on a tight budget? Is it really feasible for me to save that much?
Well, it's not just about being able to afford it, it's also about being prepared for the unexpected. Think about it like insurance. You pay premiums every month knowing that you'll be protected if something goes wrong.
That makes sense. But what about people who are living paycheck to paycheck? How can they possibly save up that much money?
Here's the thing: building an emergency fund is not a one-time task. It's an ongoing process that requires discipline and consistency.
That makes sense, but what about people who are struggling to make ends meet? Is there any flexibility in this rule?
When it comes to choosing a location for your emergency fund, one of the most popular options is a high-yield savings account.
That's right. High-yield savings accounts are liquid, low-risk, and often have no fees associated with them.
One of the main benefits of using a high-yield savings account for your emergency fund is that it allows you to earn interest on your money while still being able to access it quickly when needed.
Exactly. And, depending on your bank and the specific account, some high-yield savings accounts can offer APYs of up to 2.5%.
Of course, it's essential to choose a reputable online bank or credit union that has FDIC insurance, so you're protected in case anything goes wrong with the institution.
Absolutely. We don't want any added stress on top of an already stressful situation.
Another option for storing your emergency fund is in a money market account or a short-term CD.
Money market accounts and CDs can offer slightly higher interest rates than high-yield savings accounts, but they often come with restrictions on withdrawals.
That's right. With money market accounts or CDs, you might be required to keep your money locked in the account for a set period of time in order to avoid penalties.
However, if you're confident that you won't need to access your emergency fund during this time, these options can provide a bit more interest.
It's essential to carefully review the terms and conditions of any account before choosing it for your emergency fund.
Absolutely. We want to make sure we're making informed decisions about our money.
For some individuals, tax-advantaged accounts like 529 plans or health savings accounts HSAs might be an option for storing their emergency fund.
These types of accounts are specifically designed to help you save for a particular goal, such as education expenses or healthcare costs.
However, it's crucial to consider the rules and regulations surrounding these accounts, including any penalties for early withdrawal.
That's right. If you're not careful, you could end up losing some of your emergency fund to penalties or taxes.
So, it's essential to carefully review the terms and conditions of any tax-advantaged account before using it for your emergency fund.
Absolutely. We want to make sure we're making informed decisions about our money.
When it comes to building an emergency fund, one of the most crucial steps is determining how much you need to save. This amount varies depending on your individual circumstances.
That's right. Some experts recommend saving 3 to 6 months' worth of expenses, while others suggest 1 year or more. What about using the 50/30/20 rule as a guideline? Allocate 50% of your income towards necessities, 30% for discretionary spending, and 20% for saving and debt repayment.
That's a good starting point. However, it's essential to adjust this ratio based on your individual needs and goals. Another important aspect is the type of savings account you choose. High-yield savings accounts or money market funds can provide better returns than traditional savings accounts.
However, it's also crucial to consider liquidity and access to your money when selecting a savings vehicle.
When it comes to maintaining and reviewing your emergency fund, it's essential to regularly assess its adequacy. Ask yourself, is my emergency fund still sufficient for my current expenses?
That's a great question. For example, if you've recently moved to a new city or started a family, your expenses might have increased significantly. In that case, it may be time to adjust your emergency fund accordingly.
Exactly. Life is unpredictable, and our expenses can change overnight. It's crucial to review your emergency fund regularly, at least every 6 to 12 months.
That makes sense. How do you suggest people go about reviewing their emergency fund? What metrics should they be looking at? Let's say, after reviewing your emergency fund, you realize it's not enough. What are the next steps to take?
First, we need to determine why the fund is insufficient. Is it due to increased expenses or a decrease in income? Once we understand the root cause, we can start making adjustments.
That's a great point. How do people go about increasing their emergency fund?
There are several strategies to increase your emergency fund, such as reducing expenses, finding ways to boost income, or selling unwanted assets. When it comes to long-term emergency fund management, it's essential to consider the fund as a part of your overall financial plan.
That makes sense. What are some key considerations for people who have already established an emergency fund?
One critical consideration is investment strategy. Since your emergency fund should be easily accessible, it's best to keep it in low-risk investments, such as high-yield savings accounts or short-term CDs.
I see what you mean. How often should people review their emergency fund once they've established a solid foundation?
This tutorial is brought to you by Malik Abualzait.